Today I'm out here with what I think is the best small crossover you can buy in America right now, the all-new Bronco Sport. The last time I drove this was down in Southern California and I had incredibly little time with the vehicle. Most of it was on an off-road course and I didn't have the chance to sample the 1.5-liter turbocharged engine, which I think most people will be buying. So in this video, I'm taking a look at the Outer Banks trim, which is sort of a mid-level trim, the 1.5-liter turbo, the base all-wheel drive system, not the one with the twin clutches, and we'll talk about comparisons, pricing, and of course, how this fits in the world. In this video, I'll be talking about what the Bronco Sport is, importantly, what it is not, and who I think this vehicle is right for. The first thing we should address is the size of the Bronco Sport. This is a subcompact crossover, not a compact crossover. So even though you might want to cross-shop this against a RAV4 TRD or a Jeep Cherokee Trackhawk or something like that, bear in mind that this is in a different size category. This is in the same size category as the Jeep Renegade and the Jeep Compass, because on the outside, it's about the size of the Compass and considerably smaller than some of those larger or even the mid-size compact crossovers in the United States. This is notably shorter than the Ford Escape, even though it shares some components with the Escape. And perhaps that's the origin of some of this confusion, because even other auto reviewers out there that I work with on a regular basis are a little bit confused about exactly how the Bronco Sport fits into the lineup. But we can tell that this is a subcompact crossover two ways. The first one is by exterior dimension. This is again shorter than the Ford Escape. And the second way is because Ford says it's a subcompact crossover. That's the most logical way to go about this. Now that said, some confusion and cross-shopping is entirely logical because the Bronco Sport starts at $26,800, higher than the average subcompact crossover because all-wheel drive is standard on all Bronco Sports. There's no such thing as a two-wheel drive Bronco Sport. And then there's the boxy look of the Bronco. In pictures, the Bronco Sport looks an awful lot bigger than it really is. This is significantly smaller than the full-on Bronco four-door that we should be seeing soon, although obviously it is styled very similarly. One of the reasons that the Ford Escape went in a different styling direction is that Ford knew the Bronco Sport was coming out. So if you're looking for more of a rugged vehicle that's a little bit easier to park, a little bit smaller inside and outside, then that's the Bronco Sport. If you want something that's perhaps a little bit more sedan-like, but in crossover form, that would be the Ford Escape. I'm driving the Outer Banks model, which means we get these full LED headlights, LED fog lights below, but halogen headlights are standard. One of the other reasons people seem to get confused is that the roofline in the Bronco Sport is fairly tall. Now you can see again that this is considerably lower than the full-on Bronco or some of those other larger off-road vehicles, but as far as subcompact crossovers go, this roofline is definitely higher off the ground. But at 172.7 inches long, this is about the same length as a Jeep Compass, actually a little bit shorter, as the Chevy Trailblazer and the Kia Seltos, and 3 inches shorter than the Subaru Crosstrek. It's a whopping 9 inches shorter than the Ford Escape. And one of the biggest differences between this and the Escape is the roofline. This is definitely boxier, so it gives you a little bit more rear headroom in real-world situations, but the wheelbase is 1.5 inches shorter than the Escape, giving this better breakover angles, but also reducing total legroom inside. This has several inches less legroom than we find in the Escape. Bearing in mind that Ford owned Land Rover for quite some time, we have a very Land Rover styling touch with the roofline in this Bronco Sport. You'll notice that it actually kicks up right there just over the rear passenger door and then continues at that higher height all the way to the rear. That improves cargo practicality and rear seat headroom. Be sure and let me know what you think about the look of the Bronco Sport down there in the comment section. For me, I think this ties with the CX-30 for being the best looking small crossover in America, although for entirely different reasons. The CX-30 looks more car-like, more elegant. This definitely has the bigger butcher look that some people are interested in. And yes, in case you're wondering, that wheel is off the ground over there on that side. Features that I really love about the Bronco Sport are the fact that we can open the hatch in this fashion. This is not a powered hatch in this model here, or we can open the glass. This is something that we don't see in very many SUVs or crossovers anymore, but it's a really, really handy feature. If you're at the home improvement store and you decided you wanted to buy a longer ladder or say 10-foot lumber, in most compact crossovers, you'd have to open the rear hatch right like this, and then have that lumber or that cargo just hanging entirely out of the vehicle. It's not going to be as secure as if it were at a lower point in there with the rear seats folded and then coming out here at an angle. It's going to be an awful lot easier to deal with. And then of course there's the reality that if you have tons of stuff in the cargo area and you just want to root around for something really quick, you can just very easily get in there and do that. Under the hood, we find two different engines. The base engine is a 1.5-liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine. It produces 181 horsepower and 190 pound-feet of torque. Some people have given the Bronco Sport a bit of a problem for having a 3-cylinder base engine, but remember that we find 3-cylinder engines only in vehicles like the Chevy Trailblazer. And even though this is a 3-cylinder turbo, it produces more oomph than we find in most of the 4-cylinder options that this is competing a little bit more directly with. If you do need more power, then there is an available 2-liter turbo that will bump things up to 250 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission, and the 2-liter model gets paddle shifters behind the steering wheel. Fuel economy is best with the 1.5-liter turbo, as you might imagine. That gets 26 miles per gallon combined. The 2-liter turbo drops that down to 23. Remember that all-wheel drive is standard. The base all-wheel drive system is basically the same one that we find in the Ford Escape. If you get the 2-liter turbo in top models, then we have a twin-clutch all-wheel drive system. The key change is in the rear differential unit, where we have the twin-clutch setup. That can send power to a single wheel, or it can act like a limited slip or locking differential when the vehicle needs it to. That improves not only the off-road ability of the Bronco Sport, but it has a positive benefit on-road handling as well, because it can send power to a single rear wheel. When going around a corner, it'll send that to the outside rear wheel to help improve handling ability. For aerodynamic reasons, the air dam up front is a little bit low in most models of the Bronco Sport, and we have these little flaps right in front of the front tires and in front of the rear tires as well. But excluding the flaps, we have 7.8 inches of ground clearance minimum, up to 8.8 inches of ground clearance if you get the top end model, and axle clearance, the low point would be the rear axle in the back. 9.9 inches of axle clearance is what we find in that top end Badlands model. Hopping inside the Bronco Sport, the first thing you're likely to notice is that the door openings are a little bit narrower than the Escape. This is a smaller vehicle, so that's quite logical. But once you're inside, this actually can feel like a slightly bigger SUV because we have a really horizontal hood, and that makes it feel like the vehicle stretches out way in front of you, something that we don't find in the Ford Escape. As far as the seat itself goes, I give this 8 out of 10 points because it's pretty comfortable for my body shape, but you should know that if you're a shorter person, the seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt. So as you raise the seat bottom cushion up, the tilt is just defaulted by the seat design. It does not adjust separately. We have two-way adjustable lumbar support on the driver's side, but not on the passenger side, even though that is a power seat. You'll really notice the smaller door opening when you hop in the back. Also, the hinges don't allow this door to open quite as far as we see in some of the competition. If you routinely put child seats in and out of your vehicle, this may be a consideration. As far as combined legroom goes, with just under 80 inches of combined legroom, you will find about 4 inches more in the Ford Escape. But the Bronco Sport has a trick up its sleeve. If I scoot all the way over to the right side of this cabin, you'll notice that this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. You can really see that there's less combined legroom in here than we find in the Escape because my knees are definitely digging into the seat back, but I have a massive amount of headroom. Look at that. I have about 4 inches or so. That's because of that big bump up that we see in the roofline. This is another area where the Bronco Sport can be a little bit confusing because even though this is not as long as the Escape and we don't have as much legroom as we do in the Escape, in some ways this cabin feels more spacious because we have so much headroom both in the front and in the back, and just the design of this is so square that it feels like it could be bigger, even though it's not. The relative size is also obvious when we take a look at the cargo area. Behind this hatch, you'll get either 29.4 cubic feet of storage space or 32.5, depending on the trim of the Bronco Sport that you get. This one has the slightly larger cargo area because we don't have a spare tire that's as large. That's the big difference. Although that number is certainly healthy and it's helped out by the very square proportions of the Bronco Sport, you will get 37.5 cubic feet of storage space in the Escape and up to 40 cubic feet in some of the competition. Going in for a closer look, we have a 2-stage load floor. This has a really rubbery texture there to keep things from slipping around. We can put it in this upper height right here, or we can lower it all the way down to have access to the entire cargo area. Moving in for a closer look, there's a dual height load floor. You can raise it up about 2 inches to store some smaller items underneath it, or you can put it in its maximum height to have the entire cargo area. Under that, we find a temporary spare tire in this trim. If you get the top end off-road models, then we get a full-size spare tire back here. But again, you do have to sacrifice some cargo room. If I lower this load floor back into place, you can see that it's covered in this sort of rubbery texture top. That's obviously more durable than carpet, and it helps keep things from sliding around a bit. Thanks to all of the practical cargo touches back here, I'm going to give this 10 out of 10 points when it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index. Similar to that rubbery cargo floor, the seat backs have a removable rubbery section right here. You can see it snaps into place, so that way you can remove that for easier cleaning and then just snap it right back on. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the Outer Banks trim. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passenger's head. Interestingly enough, the shade is powered, not manual. Behind the sunroof, you can see how drastically that roofline really does change. The rear seats have sort of a stadium seating vibe in addition to just having massive amounts of headroom back there. The front seats have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests. The front seats feature an embossed Bronco logo, and this upholstery is sort of a two-tone and two-fabric setup here. So we have perforated leather in the center and then fabric on that seat back and then on the seat bottom cushion as well right there around the bolsters. I have to say this is an attractive design, and it does feel really nice in person as well. Ford's been doing a lot of different fabric combinations on their interiors lately, and this is certainly one that I approve of. Colors don't always turn out quite right on camera, but that armrest is navy blue, matching the seats. The rest of the door is made of charcoal plastic. We have a lot of soft touch materials going on, that center insert right there, and then the armrest itself, of course, is a soft touch material. But as you'd expect in a subcompact vehicle, there are a lot of hard plastics as well. For instance, down there around that bottle holder and the speaker grille, as well as up top right there around that door release. The soft touch material that makes up most of the door and the dashboard has a really interesting texture in it to help dress it up. Again, this is a soft touch material. Zooming out from there, we find two large air vents for the driver and front passenger. These have little knobs to open and close the vent right there. That's a nice touch. Below that, we have a glove compartment. It is a bin style compartment, and I was barely able to fit a 10-inch iPad inside. Plastics on the outside are hard, just as you'd expect out of a subcompact crossover. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we find the touchscreen infotainment system. This is standard. It supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We have physical buttons and knobs for a variety of different infotainment features right there, as well as the button to turn off the auto start-stop system. So if you don't like vehicles that don't allow you to disable that feature, you might want to look at this because you can. We have the engine start-stop button right here, and then a large storage compartment right above that. I was easily able to fit a phone like an iPhone 12 Pro in there. Below that, we have the dual zone automatic climate controls and then a Qi wireless charging mat. It's kind of at a different angle to the rest of the dashboard there to help it all fit in. Ford seems to really love rotary shifters lately, so of course we find one here. There's a low mode. If you get the 2-liter turbo, then you get paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel. You don't find them on the 1.5. Electric parking brake, auto brake hold button there. This is the GOAT mode selector. That's basically the drive mode selector system for the all-wheel drive system. These modes change based on the version that you get. This model, because it just has the regular all-wheel drive system, just has slippery, sport, eco, normal, and then sand mode. We have two large cup holders here, and then a really interesting tiny cup holder in the middle. If you have any of those smaller cans of soda, those will fit right there in that middle cup holder. As you'd expect out of a vehicle this size, the center console is a little bit narrower than in a compact crossover. If I open it, we find enough room in there to store some smaller knickknacks, but not a half gallon of milk. On the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster. This gives us the readouts for the drive mode changes. You can see we're in sand mode. That's why the stability and traction control mode is off. We have a physical speedometer and a physical tachometer. The software for the center display should be pretty familiar if you've driven any recent Ford product. It does change theme lightly as we rotate through the drive modes. The deserty background is definitely a nice touch when you're in sand mode. Other than that, this has your typical driver readouts for the four-wheel drive system, the tire pressure monitoring, trip computer, fuel economy, etc. One of the interesting things about the Bronco and the Mustang for that matter is that they don't say Ford on the steering wheel. This just has a Bronco logo, and the key doesn't even say Ford. It just has Bronco right there on the back. But aside from that, this is basically the same steering wheel that we find in the Ford Escape. On the left side, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control. If you get that particular option, we have volume up, down over there. And then on this side, we find the controls for that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. Also some phone buttons, voice command button, and then track forward, backward. Since Ford is billing the Bronco Sport as a very off-road capable subcompact crossover, clearly we need to talk about this out on the trail. But first, let's get the numbers out of the way. 0 to 60 happened not on this road surface, but on a regular paved surface in 8.2 seconds. That's with the 1.5-liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine. I have to say, I actually like this 1.5-liter 3-cylinder engine. Some people think that it sounds a little bit too gruff, but if I put this in neutral, it actually sounds sort of V6-like, and that makes sense because this has about half of the natural harmonics that you'd get in a V6 engine. Personally, I don't mind it. What I do like about this engine is the amount of torque that we get. Nearly 200 pound-feet of torque in a small crossover like this is definitely enough that when you're climbing up some of these trails, it doesn't have to keep downshifting and really revving the nuts off the engine in order to get you where you want to go. 60 to 0 also happened in a pretty respectable distance, 115 feet. That makes this very similar to some of these sportier on-road focused crossovers out there. And that's likely due to the tire size that we find on all the Bronco Sports. These are a little bit wider than some of those more efficiency-focused crossovers. that you might be cross-shopping with this. Tires make a huge difference with the way that a vehicle feels out on the road and feels out on the trail. So the tires that are on this mode are very city driving, highway driving focused tires. If you want the more off-road focused tires, you'll find those on the Badlands model. You can also get an optional 29-inch off-road tire. That's definitely going to be the more aggressive tire if you really find yourself in muddier or rougher situations. That's something that I certainly noticed earlier, because getting up on that little bump that I filmed earlier, the wheels and tires were just spinning and spinning and spinning because the tires had no traction. When it comes to on-road handling, the Bronco Sport falls sort of middle of the pack. The eco-focused options that are out there are, generally speaking, not going to handle as well as the Bronco, but more of the sporty on-road performance options are going to handle a little bit better than this. But I think the Bronco makes up for that in the ride quality. This has slightly higher profile tires than we find on some of the competition, and the suspension design definitely soaks up more of those larger bumps and larger imperfections that you'll find especially out on rougher off-road trails like we're on here. In my cabin noise testing, I measured 72 decibels in this cabin, putting this right in the thick of things for the subcompact category, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A- as far as the cabin noise quality goes. The one thing that really surprised me about the Bronco is the fuel economy. This one's EP rated for 26 miles per gallon. I've been averaging 29 miles per gallon, including filming, idling, going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day, and driving a few times on the trail that I'm driving right here. Fuel economy out of this 1.5-liter turbocharged engine is absolutely excellent, bearing in mind again that the all-wheel drive system is standard. You will find more fuel-efficient alternatives out there for sure, and a few options that are all-wheel drive are going to be more fuel-efficient than this, but they're not going to have quite the same kind of capability that we find in the Bronco Sport. Now let's talk about that capability. This model obviously does not have a locking differential, doesn't have that twin clutch unit, and it doesn't have a 2-speed transfer case. So the Bronco Sport is an awful lot closer to that Jeep Compass than the Jeep Cherokee. And you will certainly notice that if you get this out on sort of off-camber situations where one wheel is up in the air, it's really depending on the brake-based traction control to try and send power around to the wheels that need it. It does a pretty decent job at that, and it doesn't cut power as much as we find in the non-off-road oriented options out there. But this is not going to be as capable, obviously, as the full-on Bronco, or as something like that Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk. On the other hand, the baby Bronco has a good blend of low-end torque and reasonable traction. So if I floor it, you can really start scooting down this trail at a good clip, and it definitely has a good, solid, sorted feel to it. I would mention, however, that if you are going out on some of the rougher trails that exist, especially trails like this that are strewn with all sorts of tree branches everywhere, that you might want to pull off those little aero flaps in front of the tires, because those really are the low point in the Bronco Sport. Also keep in mind that this does not have the same kind of rugged body plates and body armor underneath the vehicle that you'd find in some of the more rugged competition, or of course, again, the full-on Bronco. But bottom line, if you're looking for one of the most capable small crossovers in America, this is absolutely in the running. And this and the Renegade and the Compass and the Cherokee really are in categories of their own as far as unibody crossovers with excellent off-road ability. Now let's dive into the pricing, another area where the Bronco Sport is difficult to categorize. Again, this is subcompact sized, as I keep saying, but price-wise, it is honestly a little bit more compact priced. $26,820 is where this vehicle starts. That is significantly more expensive than the base all-wheel drive Subaru Crosstrek, about 20% more. And the models that Ford is really promoting, the Outer Banks model and the Badlands model, start around $32,000 to $33,000, which is about the same price as the average out-the-door price on a compact crossover. So depending on how you have it configured, you could spend just as much on a Ford Escape or a Ford Bronco Sport, even though the two vehicles are not quite in the same category. This possibly explains why the first edition of the Bronco Sport was such a limited run. It could be that Ford decided that they didn't want this model to step too much on the Escape's toes, and that first edition model is sort of a combination of Outer Banks interior trappings and the Badlands Go Anywhere bits. I actually really like that combination of features in the first edition. I hope that it comes back at some point to some other trim, but at the moment, know that they're completely sold out. With that out of the way, let's dive into the competition. The first competitor has to be the best-selling entry in the segment, the Subaru Crosstrek. The Crosstrek is quite a different vehicle compared to the Bronco Sport. Obviously, they both have sort of go-anywhere missions in mind, but the Bronco Sport is notably more capable than the current version of the Subaru Crosstrek. We have more available power, we have a great deal more torque out of that 2-liter turbocharged engine available, we have a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission with more aggressive ratios than we find in the Subaru Crosstrek, and we have a more capable all-wheel drive system with that limited slip functionality in the rear. Of course, all those features are optional in the Bronco Sport, and if you equip it that way, it will definitely be more than the Subaru. In terms of interior room, the Subaru really is just a lifted Impreza hatchback, and it really feels like that. It feels more sedan, more traditional hatchback-like on the inside, whereas the Bronco Sport has a very upright feeling to it and a really tall roofline, which makes it feel bigger than it really is. So if you're looking for something that has more of a mini truck vibe, certainly the Bronco Sport is going to be the best option for you. Clearly, our next competitor has to be a Jeep, and the one that Ford says is the most direct competition is the Jeep Compass. Now that makes a lot of sense because dimensionally, it is Jeep Compass sized, not Escape and Cherokee sized. It also makes sense when you listen to some of Ford's marketing jargon where they say that the Bronco Sport is best in class for this and best in class for that. It wouldn't be best in class if it was in the same category as the Jeep Cherokee, but if we put it in the same class as the Jeep Compass, then it makes a lot of sense. Now the Compass is going to be less expensive, $23,195 for front-wheel drive, $25,415 for all-wheel drive, and there are a ton of deals going on the Compass right now. So there's lots of cash in the hood. It's going to be significantly less expensive than the Bronco Sport. When it comes to looks, I think the Bronco Sport is the clear winner here. It just looks absolutely great. And the Compass doesn't look bad, but it just doesn't look as good as the Ford. The Ford also has more power and a smoother automatic transmission. The 9-speed automatic that's available in the Compass isn't necessarily a bad transmission, but it's not the world's smoothest. Now, if you get the front-wheel drive Compass, then we actually get an ISIN transmission, basically the same one that we've seen in a wide variety of Toyotas. It is considerably smoother, but that transmission is not coupled with all-wheel drive. It's the front-wheel drive model only. Dimensionally, these two vehicles are quite similar. We have very similar cargo capacities, very similar amounts of legroom and headroom on the inside, but the Bronco Sport has a greater feeling of roominess because of its very boxy design. You'll really notice that if you hop in the back seats when there are adults up front, the Bronco Sport just feels bigger, even though on paper it really isn't. On the other hand, Jeep offers a few more high-end features and touches inside the Compass that we don't see available at this point in the Bronco Sport, and certainly more ways you can customize the Compass. There are a ton of different trim levels. The next competitor has to be the other Jeep that you might want to be cross-shopping, the Jeep Cherokee. This makes sort of sense because with all the cash on the hood, there are going to be versions of the Cherokee that could be within the same price range as the Bronco Sport at the moment, which doesn't have as many incentives or discounts. But the Cherokee is generally speaking going to be more expensive. It starts at $26,555 for front-wheel drive, $28,255 if you want all-wheel drive. If you want all the off-road bits, that's going to be the Trailhawk model at $35,795. This is where things get really unique, however, because this is the only vehicle really in this segment to offer a 2-speed transfer case, technically two 2-speed transfer cases, and a locking rear differential. If you're looking for one of the most capable transverse-engined vehicles out there, it is certainly going to be the Cherokee. Now, on the other hand, on-road driving dynamics aren't exactly the Cherokee's forte. It definitely feels a little bit more ponderous than the Bronco Sport. It certainly feels heavier and slower than the Bronco Sport as well. The Cherokee's off-road mission meant that they added so much extra steel to the vehicle that the Cherokee is quite heavy in its segment. On the other hand, the Cherokee tows relatively well. You can get a V6 engine, you can get a 2-liter turbo in that model, and again, the 2-speed transfer case and the more rugged off-road bits, tow hooks, skid plates, etc. Those are all available on the Cherokee, and it really is unique in that respect. And that's why Ford is not calling the Bronco Sport a compact crossover or a Cherokee competitor, because in many ways the Cherokee is the more off-road capable vehicle, but I would argue that the Bronco Sport is probably the more rational vehicle in a way. And that brings me along to the Escape, the trickiest one in this comparison, because a lot of folks consider the Escape and the Bronco Sport two sides to the same coin. That the Escape is the more car-like one, the more on-road focused one, and the Bronco Sport is the more off-road focused side to that same coin. But that's not actually the case, because the Bronco Sport is fairly different mechanically. It has 3.8 inches less legroom. It's 8 inches shorter overall. It has more headroom, but 20% less cargo room than the Escape. It is a significantly smaller vehicle. In addition to that, the interior feels a little bit less premium, and some of the snazzier features and fuel-saving features that we find available in the Escape are not available in the Bronco Sport because of its off-road mission and because of its price tag. Which one is right for you will depend on your priorities, but personally, if I were shopping between the Escape and the Bronco Sport, I would quite simply buy the Bronco. I just think it looks way better than the Escape. There's nothing wrong necessarily with the way the Escape looks, especially if you were a big fan of the Ford Fusion, but the Bronco Sport looks really, really good. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. If I were spending my own money in this segment at the moment and I wanted something that was a little bit more rough and tumble than the average subcompact crossover, absolutely I would get the Bronco Sport. This is absolutely one of my favorite vehicles that I have driven in the last 12 months easily, and the Bronco Sport is one of the best small crossovers, I think, on sale in America right now. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Which would you get, and which engine would you pick? I'm intrigued by that. I like the 2-liter turbo, but I have to say the 1.5-liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine is just fine in my opinion, and I would probably just end up with that model in the Outer Brakes trim, essentially exactly the same as the model that I was driving this week. Let me know what you think about that. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and be sure and check out the merch store at aoamerch.com. I'll see all of you later.